you can come back to him 5 years later, and Arya has had 5 years of training and all that. Or Bran, who was taken by the children of the forest and the green ceremony. So you could come back to him 5 years later. That's good. That works for him, but that doesn't work for everybody else. George R.R. Martin, interview on the observation deck, 2013. So welcome back to the Fattest Leech of Ice and Fire. I am your host, Leech. I'm the weird, crazy one that has started doing this Martinworld style analysis where we are together reading all of George's works. Here you go. There's all 80 plus of them up there. We're reading George's works and we're using that to somewhat dissect A Song of Ice and Fire, because that's really why we are all here. Let's face it. So if you are the type that likes to read along and or get all of the links and the actual full quotes and texts of any sort of analysis, this discussion about Jojen Paste or Bran's bowl movement, what's in the paste, that is, this is all written up on my blog, The Fattest Leech of Ice and Fire. It's under the brand tab, and I think it's the first selection under the brand tab. And I'm going to read from that post. There's basically about 7 major sections or topics to talk about, and of course I'm going to add other Martinworld analysis along the way. Huzzah, Martinworld! And the reason why I want to add George's own style is it seems like in the fandom for a while it's not everybody, believe it or not, but there's a section of the fandom that really believes that Jojen Paste is canon, sometimes even going to the extent of mocking others for not believing this. And I can see the temptation to think that and to speculate that Bran is eating Jojen. I don't think those people are wrong, but because they are picking up on what the author's putting down, but they're not picking up the right seeds. They're very close. Dragons do consume children in A Song of Ice and Fire, as they do in all of Martinworld. But which dragon are we talking about here? So again, if you're somebody that's reading along with the post I did my best to keep it down to a reasonable readable length. It has the potential to run 220,000 plus words. And I also want to add that I'm not here to really change anybody's mind, because face it, at this point, as we're waiting for the final 2 books in A Song of Ice and Fire, most everybody that's still here and still hanging out, most everybody's pretty concrete in what they believe or not believe. So this discussion is for anybody that just wants to look at the alternative version of what's going on, or just maintain some connection to Martinworld as a whole. I'm not expecting to change anybody's mind, just opening up to just the discussion to what George R.R. Martin tends to write, like his ongoing theme. So quick reminder, spoiler, all Martinworld, which includes any interviews, other stories, the endings to stories, any video links, all of that is going to be on the blog page and will be touched on here. But Leech, what are you talking about? Cannibalism is totally a thing. Eating children is totally a thing. I mean, did you not read the same books I did? Come on, this is totally something George would do. Plus, like, other people have already talked about this, and it's totally canon. Okay, so the common theory, parts of the fandom claims that what Bran is eating in the bowl during his Dance of Dragon final chapter is in fact the blood or the bloody bits of his friend Jojen Reed. If you Google the phrase Jojen Paste, you will get many, many results if you don't already know this theory yourself, which you probably do. So from my fandom experience, a main reason that some of the readers think Jojen Paste is true is the common fan theory about that includes things like baby swapping and that sacrifices integral to the history of the Night's Watch or to the others or some other reason, including what I think is kind of a misconception that the Weirwoods or Bloodraven are nefariously evil. That will be that'll be another video. But we will touch a little bits about that, about Bloodraven, Weirwoods, and stuff like that in this discussion. And sometimes I think people get this idea because in the A Dance with Dragon prologue, it is mentioned that the man who eats the flesh of man is an abomination. But that applies to dragons and other fiery people more so, or in a different way, in that true abomination way, than it does in the green side, the green river of the story. So you have the blue ice dragons and the red fire dragons, and those are the ones that do the consuming. Those are the ones that commit the abominations. George often gives us the answer to questions before he poses the question or puts it out there on page, like he preps us. So there's a lot in that A Dance with Dragons prologue that is setting up for what we are about to see. But not everything is as it seems. You have to look at the story as a whole and not just cherry pick because you are wanting a certain desired outcome that might not match what George's is. Okay, so in A Song of Ice and Fire, Bran and Daenerys are actually the two strongest magical counterpoints to that. The others, the blue ice dragon others, are a third part, but those are going to be dealt with again as a primer, as George showing us what's about to happen in the final stages of the story. It's going to be the others, and then it's going to be the fire dragon, Dany Targaryen's, with her new army. And yeah, George has said that those two, that Daenerys and Bran, are the most magical. So we're going to see many inverted parallels between the two. This is what I'm talking about, is it helps to know George's writing style. So he often presents two characters with a similar situation, but it's the choice that they make and their choices that they make along the way that add up to their final character, their final song in the end, if you will. So I opened with a quote from George where he describes Bran is going into what Bran is going into is a green ceremony, or a green wedding is what Bran sort of refers to it in A Dance with Dragons. Daenerys also has her elemental fire wedding. So George has been setting up this parallel, this magical inverted parallel between Dany and Bran since the beginning. So if you remember back to A Game of Thrones and Daenerys, when she has the big pyre going on, we get statements like this, like the flames writhe before her, like the woman who danced at her wedding. And then she thinks, this is a wedding too, she thought. Mary Mazdur has fallen silent. The god's wife thought her a child, but the child grew. The child learned. Compared with A Dance with Dragons, Bran 3, your blood makes you a green seer, said Lord Brynden. This will help awaken your gifts and wed you to the trees. So what we don't see off page, but has been not directly, but has been only fed to us in little snippets, is what the ice dragon others are doing as well, which is their union with magic their way. Think back to George discussing how the others have their own sort of ice magic. They do things with ice that nobody else can do, not unlike the Valyrians, Targaryens, with their Valyrian steel and with their dragon hatching and things along that line. Incest plays along with it too. So about the baby swapping thing, that's one of the reasons why people tend to think that this is Jojen in the paste. So taking a closer look, a narrative look, we already have the Night's Watch, the Milk Brother baby swatch, when Jon switches Gilly's son, who remains at the wall, with Mance's son, Aemon Steelsong, a brother swap for protection from the flames. So again, we have these alternate parallels of what is happening with the green element part of the story, as opposed to what's happening with the two extremes, the red fire dragon and the blue ice dragon. So you might have some swaps, but one's for protection and one's for consuming. Then when Melisandre switches Mance for Rattleshirt, then she burns the fake Mance. Again, see, this is what I'm talking about. Melisandre, she is that red fire element. She's one of the red fire extremes in the story. Her switch is to consume, because she is part of that dragon side. And then we have the upcoming Selyse, giving, most likely being the primary one, the religious element, the fiery religious element behind Shireen going to the flames. Again, that's a whole other discussion. It's not going to be like how we saw in the television show. I mean, it literally can't, but that's a different discussion. So the point is we have baby swaps for protection, and then we have baby swaps for consuming, and it depends on which element we're going with that drives that particular subplot. So a few more dragons that consume children, or examples. We have Drogon that eats Hosea, bones and memory. I have an essay about this with lots of book text and Martinworld text, and where Dany thinks about all the way through A Dance with Dragons how it was Drogon that consumed Hosea, and there's a plot reason, a character development reason behind that. Consuming one, or consuming a child to feed the one, is completely different than consuming something to feed the many. That's a big difference between the two extreme dragon elements and the green element in the middle. Daenerys consumes her pregnancy when she's out on the Dothraki Sea, when she's talking about the roast kid and the berries. Even Gregor Clegane, he's a fiery hand of Tywin. He's the roast goat, Vargo. He feeds the roast goat, Vargo Hoat, to others. And Daenerys, she even herbs up Khal Drogo, and before she smothers him with the pillow as he bakes in the sun, that effectively is her, taking his power and feeding it into herself, because she is now absorbed the Khalasar. Even fiery Cersei, quote, eats princes, she says, as she consumes the Baratheon heirs. So feeding the one to gain power for yourself is very different than consuming something in a way that feeds the many. The Weirwoods feed the many or serve the many. This really plays into what one of George's editors, I believe it was Anne Grohl, she says about George's threefold reveal. So just a few minutes ago, when I mentioned that George often gives us answers before he poses the predicament or the question, that's his threefold reveal. He gives a small hint, a medium hint, and then he whacks you over the head with it. So by the time all of these abominations in the prologue happen, you know, we've been told, we've been trained to keep an eye out for this, and we should be able to identify it when it happens. So the common theme here between the dragon elements is the flames, because fire consumes and is as the books say, the fire consumes and is a jealous, hungry god. And I want to add here that in A Song of Ice and Fire, and also as well as other George stories where he has a very fiery religious element, such as his story, A Song for Laia, where you have the Grisha, which is basically this big fiery goo lava god that's in a volcano, under a mountain like a volcano. So in A Song of Ice and Fire especially, it's spelled out rather explicitly that it's only the fire people and the R'hllorist even that make the statement of death paying for life. Daenerys, Jaqen speaking of the Red God, and Melisandre. Except they're taking this to literal extremes, as George put his sort of proto-R'hllorist, as George hints at or has developed in his proto-R'hllorist story titled Only Kids Are Afraid of the Dark. And I have that story transcribed on my reread page if you guys want to read that. Plus, there are links to it on this Jojen Paste page, Brand's Bowl movement. So here's one of the quotes from A Clash of Kings. Arya, what is that? 7. 3. The Red God has his due, sweet girl, and only death may pay for life. This girl took 3 that were his. This girl must give 3 in their place. Speak the names, and a man will do the rest. Okay, this is the opposite of the trees, whose narrative purpose is to serve the many, to guard the realms of men. The term, the phrase, guard the realms of men, that doesn't just mean the actual land of Westeros, but that has a double, if not a triple, entendre, that it means not the man realm, which is a phrase from George's Thousand Worlds universe, but it's also the astral plane. It's all, which again, we see this very explicitly in George's story, A Song for Laia. So there's this world to protect and there's this world to protect. Also, Sirene of Ash from, who's a Daenerys prototype, probably one of George's strongest, next to Daemon Julian from Fever Dream. And she plays the game of mind out on the astral plane. So this is very much so a running theme through Martinworld. The Song of Ice and Fire is no exception, and he really didn't start it there. Okay, so back to the trees, whose narrative purpose is to serve the many, to guard the realms of men. And it also acts as a type of library or citadel beyond just the structure that's in southern Westeros. It's a symbolic use of death paying for life. It's a self-sacrifice, as opposed to sacrifice from another for your own means. They're both blood sacrifices, but different intent. So what do I mean by this? Where am I going with this? Bloodraven, in his death, is to serve Bran. So there's a snippet from a video that's a few years old now from from Elio at Westeros.org, where he mentions that George had to figure out how to make Bloodraven a Targaryen. Not that Bloodraven was invented for A Song of Ice and Fire, because he most definitely was not. That I have a page on that, and I'll do a video on that, but that's not for this discussion. Bloodraven has been around almost exactly by name. He even has them named Blackwood in some cases. Bloodraven has been in Martinworld for decades. George has had to figure out how to make him a Targaryen in A Song of Ice and Fire, which is how he came up with, like, basically the half-blood bastard idea, which again also links him with Jon and blah 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 blah. So, in rivers, the rivers, the Green River. So again, it's an inverted parallel. Instead of dragons eating the children, we have Bloodraven, who is sacrificing himself. We have a dragon that's sacrificing himself to feed the green to help protect humanity. And why is Bloodraven doing this? Well, because Bran, who started the story and is probably going to end the story, he's the next Green Seer. He's the next last Green Seer, however you want to call it, whatever you want to call it. He will then serve as the new Green Seer that guards the realms of men. Being in Bloodraven's position, there's a lot of irony here. Bloodraven never abandoned the Watch. He just symbolically moved up to the highest rank, which is Sea Lord, which is somebody in Martinworld who guards a hole in space. And what Bloodraven is doing is he's on the watch for the dragons, the ice dragon, others to re-invade. He's up there guarding a hole in space. He's protecting the realms of men on the highest level, on the highest mind control level that he can. Again, we'll do more details about Bloodraven in a different video, but there are these little bits that you have to understand to know for this idea, to know that Bloodraven's not evil. Sorry, don't mean to giggle there, but I honestly don't get these ideas, how we're, that people have that Bloodraven's so evil and that he's out to steal Bran's body or kill and eat Jojen, which there really isn't anything in the books that says that or hints at that, either in Bloodraven's current life or his past living human life. There's nothing in any part of Martinworld with the Bloodraven type character that leads to this. I mean, like, nothing. Not even the show, which I don't talk about. Not even the show that loves adding shocking scenes, to shock its viewers, to get ratings, to get people to talk about this at the water cooler the next day. The show didn't even have anything close to this, as far as I know. If it did, I mean, let me know. Leave a message. So, to summarize this one point, fire feeds the self, as it is said directly in A Song of Ice and Fire and other George stories with a fire god element. And the green feeds the future. Again, as we're seeing develop in A Song of Ice and Fire, but we very explicitly see in other George stories, such as For a Single Yesterday, even in Night Flyers, definitely in Fever Dream, and then in George's story, Windhaven, that little series. That's what's in his bag of writing tricks. So the green feeds the future. That brings us to A Dance with Dragons, Bran 3. It's a long quote. I'm not going to read the whole thing, just the key parts. But again, this whole quote and everything else is on the page if you want to follow along, or click to it and read it on your own time at a different time. So it starts with, your uncle may have been named for me. So we have this idea of a Brynden, Bloodraven rivers, especially the Brynden part, being a cyclical idea. George has reworked the name Lord Byron on the river from his own story, Fever Dream. If you've read that story, you know what I'm talking about. He quotes Byron in that story quite often, and he's never on page, but he's a bit of a key player, like a background sort of key player to Josh York, Josh York is one of George's strongest prototypes, where he's taken one character from his old stories and he's divided him or her into three, and that's the Bran, Bloodraven, John trio that I talk about all the time. Okay, so back to the quote. Most of him has gone into the tree, explained the singer Mira, called Leaf. So singer stew, this whole singer idea, again, that's something George has developed in his other stories, and we even see it in Black and White and Red All Over, where there is old Shakespeare is a key witness in a murder, and there is a drink in that story that's essentially singer stew, either the King's Landing version or something almost a little bit more literal in this Bran cave idea. And that's the story. Black and White and Red All Over. It's a joke. It's about a newspaper. The newspaper system is the Raven system in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's how people communicate, how you document history. And that's where this other Blackwood, Bloodraven type Blackwood character comes from. Plus the sigil for House Blackwood, if you think about what it looks like, it's black and white and red all over. That's how George decided on those colors. And I can add some pictures to that on the page if you want. Yeah, so that has more. So yeah, the Blackwood sigil has more to do with Bloodraven being part of the Weirwood net, this communication system, rather than being some inversion of albinism or some inversion of Targaryenism. It's what George needs him to be, what his symbol is in the story, his character symbol in the story. So most of him has gone into the tree. He has lived beyond his mortal span, and yet he lingers. For us, for you, for the realms of men. Only a little strength remains in his flesh. He has 1,000 eyes in one, but there is much to watch. One day you will know. 1,000 eyes in one, again, that comes from George's days in journalism. He does this in his story Armageddon Rag as well, as what and Black and White and Red All Over. It's 1,000 eyes in one is a reworked term from those stories. And then we get to, what do the trees remember? The secrets of the old gods. Truths the first men knew, forgotten now in Winterfell, but not in the wet wild. We live closer to the green in our bogs and crannogs, and we remember. Earth and water, soil and stone, oaks and elms and willows. They were here before us and will still remain when we are gone. So we have this very animistic faith. It's not even so much a religion. It's more of a faith, or tenets on a way of life that we have in this green element. Never in the story do we have any true examples of the green element demanding anything. There are some cases where the humans, like at when Davos hears about people over by White Harbor, I believe it. Oh God, I'm brain farting here. Yeah, in White Harbor, the wolf's den over there where they're hanging entrails, that's because those were slavers. That wasn't a required sacrifice. That's something that the humans took upon themselves to do, and something against slavery, either mental or physical slavery. And then what Bran sees at the end of his visions, we actually don't know what that is yet. With the woman that cuts the throat of the guy, chances are that was a judgment from a king, or a leader. That Bran is going to change. That's an old way. Bran's ushering in enlightenment, a new way. But again, that part's a different essay, a different video. Green seeing means enlightenment. Look it up. Okay, so Martin even adds to the teaser of blood sacrifices in the semi-canon The World of Ice and Fire book. That book is not canon. just to get that out there, George has said that. It's semi-canon. It's like a reference book. It's, and we all like to read it and kind of catch all of the times where a maester says, oh, you don't have to pay attention to that, ... That's done on purpose. It's semi-canon. Then the In-World book, Wed to the Sea, being an account of the history of White Harbor in its earliest days, written by Yorick. That's what I was talking about before. So if you went to see for yourself these books, when I'm talking about the quotes, it's on my page. But again, the sacrifices that we read about or get little snippets about in the story from these green element guys, it has to do with freeing people and holding slavers accountable for their crimes against humanity. And who knows who's responsible for the different ways the humans on the story do it or celebrate. I mean, if you want to, yes, that is absolutely in George's bag of tricks, that the way the humans handle things is not always seems logical to us. It might seem kind of weird and icky to us. I mean, read In the House of the Worm and A Song for Laia, and especially stories like And Seven Times Never Kill Man, and so on and so on. I mean, we've got 80 plus stories of George's. Those are just a small inkling or a small sampling. So to answer the question from above, what am I thinking? I plain old this, that I do not believe that Bran was given Jojen to eat, but rather that is Brynden Bloodraven Rivers as a Weirwood in that bowl. The blood of the raven, so to speak. That's why George gave him the nickname Bloodraven. You need to have the blood of the raven. Bloodraven lasted as long as he did. He was preserved in that far icy north, so to speak, because he had to wait for Bran to get to him so that Bran can evolve from weepy babe sapling, as Bran talks about himself, refers to himself in A Dance of Dragons, into the Weirwood Library Heart Tree. Jojen, as good of a boy as he is, he has the ability to have prophetic dreams that are called green dreams. But that seems to be, pardon the phrase, a step down from a higher talented green seer. Does George write a distinction in levels of talent within his different, quote, magical people in his stories? You better believe it. So again, this is in George's bag of tricks, that not all magical talent people are the same. Night Flyers is an example. A Song for Laia, again, is another example. So different people have different talents that serve a very specific purpose. And there's not a lot of overlap in them. It's like, in Song for Laia, Rob, his talent only can do this, and then Laia's talent can only do this. They don't actually really overlap or each other than you have two different people that are together to give a bigger picture. But yeah. Jojen is not a green seer. So Bran already seems rather advanced in his talents, and as Bloodraven says, the hour is late. Therefore, it seems that Bran needs the strong brew, I guess you can call it, to get his roots tapped into history now. So again, this goes back to the opening quote about George. The 5-year gap, I think, kind of screwed things up with Bran and his development and what we see along the way. George now has to hurry things along with Bran and his training, which might be one of the reasons why he seems so much more advanced than Bloodraven ever was, because George needs him to hurry up, tap your roots into that system. We got dragons coming. The hour is late. So the hour is late means that the ice dragons, others, are probably already there or near enough. This coincides with Jon's last chapter in A Dance with Dragons when he is stabbed and he feels only the cold. Again, another essay, another video, and a lot of people think that means that is Jon feeling his own death. The way George writes, I think that Jon feeling only the cold is him feeling that very specific, almost magical cold that the others bring. That's like what Val says. When the others arrive, it's going to be so cold it hurts to breathe. Mark my words, Jon's going to have breathing problems when we see him again in the Winds of Winter. Okay, so Brynden Rivers is about 125 years old, and the long night is about to happen again. So I'm thinking that what we're being shown is what readers have been warned about. Again, the World of Ice and Fire, Ancient History, the Long Night section says, during the hardest winters, it is customary for the oldest and most infirm among the Northmen to claim they are going out hunting, knowing full well they will never return, and thus leaving a little more food for those likelier to survive. Doubtless this practice was common during the long night. That's exactly what we see happening to Brynden Bloodraven Rivers as he's in his Weirwood throne, and the hour is late, and he's so old that it's hard for him to talk. Which, again, this ability for a weirwood to grow in a dark cave is important to Bran, because that's where a lot of in Ice and Fire, that's where a lot of the green seeing abilities flourish and develop or are switched on, so to speak. Are these these darkling plains? That's the best, most Martinworld specific way to call it, and it's the darkling plain. So the only weirwood in the cave to get seeds or blood sap from is Bloodraven. He is sacrificing himself in a type of northern way to let the next generation survive. Even Martin says that Bloodraven is half a tree. That was a little discussion that George and I had about Bloodraven at Balticon 50 a few years ago. The paste is Bloodraven. And then we have a few quotes that really describe what Bloodraven looks like. So, he's what skin the corpse lord showed was white, save for a bloody blotch that crept up his neck onto his cheek. His white hair was fine and thin as root hair and long enough to brush against the earthen floor. Roots coiled around his legs like wooden serpents. A spray of dark red leaves sprouted from his skull. The gray mushrooms spotted his brow. A little skin remained, tight and hard as white leather, but even that was fraying, and here and there the brown and yellow bone beneath was poking through. So again, this is this is a lot like some of the Green Seer prototype elements that George has written about in other stories of his, like For a Single Yesterday again, as one example. So what about some other examples of Martin keeping to his own developed themes in his work? Well, he has this idea where he uses the drink of the green fountain as a way of bringing peace, generally after a time of war where the dragons dance, but the seed is strong, which means that there's hope. There's a interview from George at the end of, I believe it was fall of 2019, where he said that when he was in Chicago, there was two main statements that he made, that Song of Ice and Fire at heart is a war story, but what he feels most stories are lacking nowadays, especially sci-fi stories, fantasy stories, and what he wants to see in stories is hope, is rebuilding, that there is a future. Those are the types of stories he grew up with. What sci-fi and fantasy was focusing on then was hope. You know, you go to this weird, cool world, there might be some wars, some current devastation, but the point of the story, the climax of the story, you get up there through all of this tragedy and you see that there's hope on the horizon. He's writing that into A Song of Ice and Fire. As much as a lot of people are probably going to scoff at that because they think that George is just like a war-hungry weirdo that writes a lot about incest. So even in Martin's story, Fever Dream, and I have two big book quotes on the blog page if you want to read them for yourself. Again, I mentioned it a few minutes ago. In Fever Dream, Josh York, he's one of the two main protagonists. He's the vampire, but he is controlling his red thirst, and he does this by creating this herbal green elixir that's terrible to taste. It's a lot like Bran when he first tastes the Weirwood paste. You know, at first he's like, what is this? It's horrible. But then after a few bites, he's like, well, I kind of like it. It's exactly the same thing that happens in Fever Dream with the green drink. Yeah, this is an herbal elixir that's crafted from a mix of lore and magic merged with modern science that allows Josh York to become enlightened. I say this all the time. Green seeing means enlightenment. Huzzah! Bran is having the same sensation Daenerys is having in House of the Undying with the inky blue shade of the evening tree. That tree was invented for Dany to have a parallel experience. We're not going to have much more on the shade of the evening tree, besides maybe Euron drinking a little bit more of the juice. Maybe Dany drinks more of the juice when she gets to King's Landing and like has an interaction with Euron. I don't know. But that tree, he's sort of borrowing a lot of from his story Windhaven, and I talked a little bit about this on Twitter, borrowing a little bit from Windhaven about the shade of the evening tree. It's not going to be as big of a deal in the long run as the Weirwoods. Weirwoods are our focus here. So what Bran is also doing in combination with Bloodraven is they're experiencing the Northern Way. Again, Bran, Bloodraven, Jon. They are the three linked characters from George's long, I think like 50-year writing history at this point, that are all going through really tough extremes in this tough northern stark climate. And this is why there's that line, I believe it's by Tyrion to Jon in the Game of Thrones, where he says there's more of the North in you than your brothers. This is one of the reasons why, is because Jon has a green seeing, green magic element in him that's going to be stronger than it was in Robb and even Arya and Sansa and Rickon. It's because Jon is going to be reconnected, literary wise, reconnected to Bran and through the green system, the green waterways, whatever you want to call it. So it's a combination of self-sacrifice, this northern way, and cannibalism, and very specifically in severely desperate times that allows the next generation to survive. Again, consume to feed the one, or consume to feed the many, to serve the many, serve the future. This includes the quote pig and the elk friend that Bran and friends have to eat in order to survive, to help the future. I'm going to say this a lot. I'd say that the return of the White Shadow Ice Dragon others counts as a rather extreme situation where they are going to have to commit these, quote, abominations if they were doing it a different way for a different purpose. Again, like parallel opposites here. So Dance with Dragons, Bran 1. Mira's glove had tightened around the shaft of her frog spear. Who sent you? Who is this three-eyed crow? A friend, a dreamer, a wizard. Call him what you will. The last green seer. Cold hands did not move. A monster, said Bran. It's like, well, is it really? So Bran has been, since the very beginning with Old Nan, he's been thrown into this situation of living through these children's monster stories, and now he's from tales, and now he's living them out for real. So he's going to be put into some difficult situations where he's going to have to make some difficult choices, but it's all for the greater good. So again, Brynden Rivers, he was born a great bastard. He was offered the chance to resign his bastard name and to take the Targaryen surname as his father offered to him as he lay on his deathbed. But Brynden Rivers declined the fiery association and chose an identity for himself, keeping his connection to the water. And think about Winterfell in the north. Especially Winterfell itself. You know, waters rush through its walls like the chambers, and chambers like blood through a man's body. So we constantly have this connection of like mixed symbolism of blood and water and heat and everything in Winterfell as a heart, as the heart tree. We also get the quote from Arya, and I believe there's another one from Jon that explains that in the harshest winters, the men in the north, they go out and they sacrifice themselves to let the other generation, the next ones coming up, live. So saying all this brings us back to the point of it is to show that there's this connection, this green connection between like Bran, Bloodraven, Jon, and Winterfell with the blood in the rivers, the waters, and Bloodraven taking his own identity, which is what we're going to see Bran have to do, which is what we're going to see Jon have to do. They might not be so-called Starks anymore because Jon's going to be Jon Snow, King of Winter, and Bran is going to be the next Greenseer, probably not going to be using the Stark name anymore. Which brings us back to Bloodraven and his commitment to the Watch, which includes how tightly knit the northern houses and customs are between the two. The old ways are returning and the trees have eyes again. Another way we see these old ways returning is in the way that the Night's Watch is shifting under Jon's command. It's also reawakening an eye to the true purpose of the Watch that has most likely been twisted throughout history. The old go off to die in order to make room for the new. It's gardening. Essentially, it's gardening. We have this quote from Dance with Dragons. Winter is almost upon us, boy, and winter is death. I would sooner my men die fighting for the Ned's little girl than alone and hungry in the snow, weeping tears that freeze upon their cheeks. Everybody knows this this speech. It's one of the most awesome ones in the in the book series. But again, this is talking about Arya, and it's talking about the men going off fighting to die to save the next generation. And then A Dance with Dragons and Jon says, men too old or crippled go off to war. Again, this is what Bloodraven is doing. He is guarding a hole in space in Martinworld terms, and he is going to he's going to die. And I think that's when Jojen knows he's going to die as well. Jojen keeps saying, today is not the day, today is not the day, today is not the day. I don't think we're going to see Jojen just that he has died off page and like somehow Bran stumbles upon him. I don't think that's how it's going to be. It's going to be an ice dragon other that consumes Jojen Reed. Yes, the old men gather up what strength remains in them and announce that they are going hunting. Think back again to the quote just above about the state that Brynden Bloodraven Rivers is in right now. He's an old man. He's the oldest man we have. And he's going to gather what strength remains in him, which amount of like human life is still left on him, what mental capacity he has, and he's going to do what he can to save the next generation. And then that's when he's going to finally full consciousness go into a tree. After that is when he's killed, probably by the ice dragon others. I'm gonna cry. Yeah, this is the quote that sort of reinforces that idea. It's from A Feast for Crows and Arya 2. She remembered a tale she heard from old Nan about how sometimes during a long winter, men who'd lived beyond their years would announce they were going hunting. There is a phrase in George's story, The Skin Trade, about the Skinner, who is the great other of that story. To call him does this weird flip in power in the story, and there's a phrase that's used 2 or 3 times in that story. It says the hunter becomes the hunted. So the hunter is the others, or the dragons. Dragons are hunters, and they are going to at one point become the hunted. So when we keep hearing things about these old men in the north that go out hunting, yes, in the man realm, that's going to be more literal. In the game of mind world, the astral plane, that's going to be a little bit different, and that's why you need to be a green seer to be able to fight that part. Unfortunately, Bloodraven's not going to be able to make it. I keep saying that, and I keep saying that I'm going to cry when that happens, when he dies. But the whole point is Bran is the seed that is strong. So the old ways saying that they're hunting in across George's stories, it's a self-sacrifice, just like Jesus and the body of Christ at the Last Supper. This is Bloodraven's Last Supper. This is also something Martin has reworked from his quote Catholic story, The Way of Cross and Dragon, and it appears that it fits perfectly into Martin's threefold reveal. So again, I'm going to read that to you from Anne Groel. She says, it's easier to tell when he's overplaying a hand and revealing things too early if you don't actually know going in what will happen. That said, now that I've realized his threefold revelation strategy, I see it in play almost every time. First, the subtle hint for the really astute readers, followed later by the more blatant hint for the less attentive, followed by just spelling it out for everyone else. It's a brilliant strategy and highly effective. So again, George has given us the answers before he proposed the problem or the question. He already told us in previous chapters that the old men go out hunting, go out to die. They go self-sacrifice to let the next generation grow. It's a type of gardening. So we're going to see that in play in the third reveal in The Winds of Winter. So to quote Wyman Manderley, the North remembers, and the mummer's farce is almost done. My son is almost home. So, like, what is all of this for? What's the big why behind it? What's the literary plot purpose of all of this? Well, it's for the upcoming song of Ice and Fire. It's a battle of ice and then fire. Daenerys is the fire dragon, as the others are the ice dragon. The two extremes that have to be removed in order for regrowth to happen. The whole Bran the Builder idea. A chance for everyone and their dog to heal from all of the wars of blood and fire. A balance brought back to the natural order of things. So, we have the ice dragon, others, and their specific magical ways. They're very specific cold that they bring when they arrive. When they arrive during a night. Their special ice magic that they can perform. The items that they create out of that. And then the parallel to that, a song of ice and fire. A song of ice, a battle of ice, and then fire. That's what the title of the series means, according to George. We have Dany returning with her black fire, both with Drogon and with the black fire sword she's going to get. Whatever's going to happen between her and Aegon VI. Remember what we hear about looking for Rhaegar's rubies. She's going to be that last ruby, I believe. And once that last ruby is found, whether it's her or Jon or somebody, once that last ruby is found, then we're going to see it all come back to water again. And we're going to see like another battle at the Trident between, whoever it's going to be. I believe it's going to be the red fire with the green element again, as we saw between Robert and Rhaegar before, but it's going to be history repeats with a twist. It doesn't mirror each other, but it does sort of rhyme. So if you want to read some of the Martinworld ideas that I have brought together about how Dany fits into this story, how Dany and her dragons are consuming from the red fire side, I have a couple of essays that I've linked to. It's Waking the Last Dragon, or you can read The Glass Flower, the story that I've transcribed, or you can read The Green Seeing Means Enlightenment, or you can read the Hosea Bones and Memory essay. So, a lot of the ice dragon stuff is prepping us for the fire dragon stuff. So this is why Martin brought the Bloodraven character back on page for A Song of Ice and Fire. It's the convergence of all of his world building brought to a glorious finale, this whole magnum opus that he's working towards. A Dance with Dragons, Brand 3. It says, a man must know how to look before he can hope to see. That's the difference between having information and having knowledge and wisdom. Which brings us to the flight. When Bloodraven tells Bran he'll never walk again, but he'll fly. That is a huge Martinworld repeating theme, that it has to do with green seeing. And green seeing means enlightenment, and that enlightenment brings about a societal change, a progress in a good way. Such as the idea that there will be no more, quote, walking, because the time for flight will be upon the world. This happens in Windhaven. This happens in Night Flyers. This happens in so many George stories. So what is the Interregnum? Well, in George's Thousand Worlds universe, which Ice and Fire is not secretly in Thousand Worlds, but both of them are in Martinworld. The Interregnum, as described in Dying of the Light, is essentially the prototype to the Long Night in A Song of Ice and Fire. It was the historical period between the collapse and the resumption of starflight. By its very nature, the Interregnum is difficult to date precisely, just like the Long Night. Some worlds experience the collapse early, some late. Some lost starflight for 5 years, some for 50, or some for 500. But some places like Avalon, Baldur, New Home, and Old Earth, in Thousand Worlds universe, those are all like the sort of green seeing type of planets, especially Avalon. They never really lost starflight. These are the places where Chloronimus is, where he creates the Academy of Human Knowledge. That is essentially the green seeing network from Thousand Worlds has been rewritten as the Weirwood network. It is commonly said that the Interregnum lasted a generation, just like the Long Night. This is workable enough as a rough approximation if only the major human worlds are considered. So again, it's just like in the World of Ice and Fire book, that's why it's semi-canon. We don't have the full account from everybody. We have it from maesters. So the Interregnum is the prototype for the Long Night, which was a war between humanity and something called the Herangans, which are essentially the two dragon extremes in A Song of Ice and Fire. So to start to sort of wrap this up, so where is Jojen? At the time of this writing, the current book being A Dance with Dragons, we do not know what happened to Jojen. We do know it has been some time since Bran has seen him, and the cave system is dark with steep drops and caverns. But at this point, we don't have any definitive evidence that Jojen is dead and his blood and parts are making up the base of the soup. Jojen's deterioration in the later chapters are due to his homesickness, or the physical place he is in. It seems like the further he moves away from either his home or the wall or something, and I think it's his home, the less, the more he sort of starts to fall apart physically. Again, this is an opposite parallel of the fire element of proximity telepathy that George uses by name in some of his other stories, and by example that he's using in A Song of Ice and Fire. If you want to know what proximity telepathy is, you can read my transcribed story in 7 Times Never Kill Man, or just leave me a message and I will answer it there, but I don't want to go into it right now. So if Jojen Paste is your speculation, that's perfectly fine. I'm not trying to change any minds here, just discussing the text in Martinworld as a whole. So if George has decided that Jojen is Paste, then so be it. That's what it is. However, the details of the current speculation, they really range from really outrageous ideas to Jojen volunteered himself. That is a side possibility. If Jojen volunteered himself, that would be a northern way to handle things. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the repeating theme is that dragons consume the children, whether it's Cersei or Euron or Dany, Drogon by way of Dany, things like that. The dragons consume the children. And as Jojen keeps saying, this is not the day I die, sister. I promise you. So promise. So I have a few other examples and quotes from other George stories if you want to read this page. There are some examples of possible cannibalism, but they come from fire element people like Morgan Le Fay in Bitterblooms, where part of the quote says, one dinner time she remembered John's story of Cannibal Hall and looked down with horror at the red meat they were eating. She ate only vegetables that meal and for several meals thereafter, until she finally decided that she was being childish. Sean considered asking Morgan about the strangers who approached and vanished, but she was afraid. The thing is that, without going too far into it, this really is the strongest theme that George does. Is it's the fire people that are performing the cannibalism, the eating of children, that feeds the self, that feeds the power in the self, not the many. So as far as all of the other like crazy ideas, or even the relatively normal sounding ideas for Jojen Paste, I'm not convinced about them. If you are, that's great. I'm not convinced by them, but they are fun to talk about. And it is fun to say Jojen Paste. You know, I'm not that much of a Grinch, but I always come back to this one line stated by Royd Eris, who again is a brand Bloodraven John, extremely strong prototype. Royd Eris from the story Night Flyers, where a bunch of people are sitting around theorizing about what Royd really could be. And they're coming up with really crazy stories, like he's a gas giant. And Royd comes out and he says, sadly, the truth is less dramatic. That is like the most meta line of all of George's Martinworld writing ever. That applies to everything. Sadly, the truth is less dramatic. I will give you this as my crackpot corner, I call it. So after all of the discussion saying you're still dying for, and say you're still dying for Jojen Paste, an answer to Jojen Paste, and you like forced me to give you my opinion on what it could be. If I had to make an educated crackpot decision guess, because I was forced to at knife point, I would guess that it was the blood of a child of the forest. So again, it's like a twist on the consuming of children. It would be the blood of a child of the forest. And I think it would be, in the northern way, a self-sacrifice. So if you really, really want the blood part, it might be that. But again, I'm not here to try to convince you one way or another. I'm here just to give you some Martinworld perspective on it. And that overwhelmingly it is Weirwood Paste, but that Weirwood Paste is Brendan Bloodraven Rivers. That's why he has that name, and that's what George has been building up for him to have to do for a long, long time. So thank you for sticking with me for this long. Again, if you have any questions along the way, just send me a message. You know how to find me online, whether it's on my blog that's linked or some other social media. I'm always up for talking about George stuff, Martinworld stuff in particular. And huzzah! Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.